The sound of shattering glass pierced the tranquil morning air as Samuel Turner's world suddenly filled with alarmed voices and the sensation of hot coffee spilling across the small outdoor table. His own cup remained miraculously untouched as chaos erupted around him. But in the darkness that had been his constant companion for the past 15 years, Samuel could only piece together what was happening through fragments of sound, scent, and the immediate, protective pressure of Thor's body against his leg. How could such a peaceful morning at Glendale's beloved Sunrise Café transform so quickly from a sanctuary of familiar routines into what now sounded like the beginnings of a confrontation that Samuel couldn't see but could feel building like an approaching storm? What invisible threat had caused Thor, his normally composed retired canine German shepherd, to shift from relaxed alertness to the tense, vigilant posture that Samuel could sense through the harness in his hand? Before we delve deeper into this story of extraordinary loyalty and courage, I invite you to subscribe to Hearts and Paws, where tales of remarkable bonds between humans and animals remind us of life's most profound connections. Listen to Samuel and Thor's entire journey to understand the depth of devotion that can exist between species and how sometimes our greatest protectors come with four paws and unconditional hearts. Samuel tightened his grip on Thor's harness, a gesture that had become second nature in moments of uncertainty. At 57, Samuel had navigated the world without sight for long enough to develop an acute sense of his surroundings, but he still relied on Thor for both guidance and companionship. Their morning ritual at Sunrise Café represented more than just coffee. It was Samuel's connection to the community he couldn't see but could still feel part of thanks to Thor. Well, what do we have here? A voice Samuel didn't recognize cut through the ambient chatter of the cafe patio, closer than comfortable, carrying notes of amusement and something harder to identify, something that made the hairs on Samuel's neck stand up. A blind man and his dog taking up the best table in the house. Thor's low, almost imperceptible growl vibrated through the harness, a private warning signal developed over their 7 years together. The retired police dog, with his impressive training and natural protective instincts, was communicating something that Samuel had learned to interpret instantly. Threat. Caution. Stay alert. I believe we were here first, Samuel replied calmly. Years of navigating difficult social situations without the benefit of visual cues evident in his measured response. And there are plenty of other tables available this morning. The stranger's laugh carried no warmth. My friends and I prefer this one, don't we, boys? Samuel detected the sound of heavy boots shifting on concrete, suggesting at least 2 other people had joined the first speaker. The subtle pressure of Thor's body against his leg increased, another signal in their silent language. One that meant Thor was positioning himself between Samuel and the perceived threat. Your dog seems uptight, the voice continued, now tinged with deliberate provocation. Does he bite, or is he just for show? Chapter 2. Thor's past. Thor hadn't always been Samuel's companion. 8 years earlier, the German Shepherd had been among the Metropolitan Police Department's most decorated canine officers, with a record of service that included everything from drug detection to suspect apprehension. His handler, Officer Martinez, often joked that Thor had better instincts than most human officers on the force, a claim that wasn't entirely in jest. What made Thor exceptional wasn't just his physical capabilities or his training, but his remarkable ability to assess situations and respond with precisely calibrated force. Where some police dogs might react with immediate aggression to perceived threats, Thor demonstrated an almost uncanny discernment, a quality that had saved lives on more than one occasion during his service. The incident that ended Thor's active duty had also showcased this discernment. During a tense standoff with an armed suspect, Thor had moved with characteristic precision, disarming the man without causing serious injury, despite the genuine danger of the situation. But in the process, Thor had sustained a deep laceration that damaged tendons in his right hind leg. Though he recovered, the injury left him with a slight but permanent limp that disqualified him from further active service. For a dog of Thor's intelligence and energy, retirement could have been devastating. Many former service animals struggle with the transition to civilian life, their purpose suddenly stripped away. But the department's canine program had a partnership with organizations that trained service animals, and Thor's temperament and intelligence made him an ideal candidate for a second career. Samuel Turner had lost his sight in his early 40s due to complications from diabetic retinopathy. After years of adjusting to blindness, learning to navigate with a cane, adapting his apartment with technological aids, and gradually rebuilding his independence, Samuel had finally applied for a guide dog. The waiting list was long, the process rigorous, but Samuel's persistence had eventually brought Thor into his life. Their initial training period together had revealed an immediate connection. Thor approached his new role with the same dedication he had shown as a police dog, and Samuel quickly learned to trust the animal's judgment implicitly. Within weeks, they moved together as a single unit, Thor guiding Samuel through city streets with confidence and precision, navigating obstacles with such fluid grace that onlookers often remarked on the beauty of their coordination. But it was more than just practical assistance that Thor provided. In the quiet evenings in Samuel's apartment, when the challenges of navigating a sighted world sometimes left Samuel emotionally drained, Thor would rest his head on Samuel's knee, a silent companion, whose steady presence gradually filled the isolation that had characterized the early years of Samuel's blindness. 7 years into their partnership, the bond between them transcended the typical handler-service animal relationship. They had developed a language of subtle cues, physical signals, and vocalizations that allowed for complex communication. Samuel could discern Thor's different types of alertness, from casual interest to serious concern, through slight changes in the tension of the harness or the pressure of Thor's body against his leg. And now, on what should have been a peaceful Tuesday morning at Sunrise Café, Thor was signaling a level of concern that Samuel hadn't felt from him in years. Chapter 3. The Provocation. His name is Thor, Samuel replied evenly to the stranger's question about whether his dog would bite. He's a retired police canine and my guide dog. He doesn't bite unless there's a good reason. A police dog, huh? The stranger's voice took on a new edge. I've had my share of run-ins with cops and their mutts. Never been impressed. Samuel heard the scrape of a chair being pulled out at his table, an uninvited intrusion into his personal space. The cafe had fallen unusually quiet, the normal morning chatter diminishing as other patrons sensed the building tension. My name's Derek, the stranger continued, his voice now directly across from Samuel. These are my friends, Axel and Vince. We ride with the Phantom Lords MC. Maybe you've heard of us? Samuel hadn't, but the posturing in Derek's voice told him enough. The motorcycle club was likely trying to establish a reputation, or maintain one, and Derek had decided that antagonizing a blind man and his service dog in public might somehow serve that purpose. I'm Samuel, he replied, keeping his tone neutral, and I'd appreciate being left to enjoy my coffee in peace. A bark of laughter from one of the other men, Axel or Vince, Samuel couldn't tell which, suggested that peace wasn't on their agenda. That's a nice watch you're wearing for a blind guy, Derek remarked. What's the point of that? Not like you can tell the time. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to the timepiece on his wrist, a tactile watch with raised markers that allowed him to tell time by touch, a gift from his late wife before her passing 5 years ago. It was one of his few remaining connections to her, and the stranger's mockery of it stung more than Samuel cared to admit. I manage just fine, Samuel said, his voice tighter now. Hey, I'm just curious. Derek continued, false innocence dripping from his words. I mean, how do you even know what your dog looks like? Maybe he's ugly as sin. Maybe we're doing you a favor by taking him off your hands. Thor's body tensed further against Samuel's leg, but the dog remained perfectly positioned, making no sound despite the clear provocation. Years of police training had instilled in Thor an exceptional level of discipline. He wouldn't react without clear cause or command, but Samuel could feel the dog's heightened alertness through the harness, a coiled readiness that communicated volumes. Thor is essential to my independence, Samuel explained, striving to keep the situation from escalating. He's not just a pet. Independence. Derek scoffed. You call having to rely on an animal independence seems pretty dependent to me. Samuel heard the sound of a chair scraping back, someone standing up nearby, followed by a female voice he recognized as belonging to Elaine, the cafe's owner. Is there a problem here, Samuel? Elaine asked, her normally friendly tone carrying an unusual edge. Before Samuel could respond, Derek cut in. No problem at all. Just having a friendly chat with Samuel and his dog here. Fascinating, really, learning about how blind people get by. The false congeniality in Derek's voice wouldn't have fooled anyone, least of all Elaine, who had known Samuel as a regular customer for years. Samuel, Elaine said deliberately, your usual table will always be reserved for you, but if these gentlemen are bothering you, I'd be happy to ask them to leave. Samuel appreciated Elaine's support, but was acutely aware of the potential for the situation to worsen if Derek and his friends felt publicly challenged. Years of navigating the world without sight had taught Samuel to diffuse rather than confront when possible. We're fine, Elaine, Samuel assured her, though his hand remained firmly on Thor's harness. Just finishing up my coffee before heading home. If you're sure, Elaine replied, doubt evident in her voice. I'll be right inside if you need anything. As Elaine's footsteps retreated, Derek leaned closer across the table. Samuel could smell leather and cigarettes, and something sharper, perhaps alcohol, though it was barely 10 a.m. Your girlfriend's protective, Derek sneered. But she's right about one thing. This is your usual table. Routine is dangerous, Samuel. A blind man with a predictable schedule. That's just asking for trouble, isn't it? The comment landed like a stone in Samuel's stomach. It wasn't just the implied threat but the sudden awareness of his own vulnerability. His morning visits to Sunrise Cafe had indeed become a comfortable routine, one that now felt exposed and precarious. Thor shifted position slightly, pressing more firmly against Samuel's leg. The dog had picked up on Samuel's anxiety, or perhaps was responding to something in Derek's body language that Samuel couldn't see. Either way, Thor was communicating in their private language. I'm here, I'm alert, we are not alone in this. Chapter 4. Testing boundaries. You know what I've always wondered? Derek continued, seemingly emboldened by Samuel's discomfort. How much those fancy service dogs actually understand. They say they're smart, but I have my doubts. Samuel heard the distinctive sound of food being unwrapped, probably one of the cafe's pastries, followed by the subtle change in Thor's breathing that indicated the dog had noticed but was maintaining his disciplined stance. Why don't we find out? Derek said, his voice taking on a performative quality, as if playing to an audience. Hey dog, want a treat? Come on, come get it. Thor didn't move from Samuel's side, maintaining perfect position despite what Samuel assumed was direct temptation being offered. Service dogs were extensively trained to ignore food unless specifically given permission by their handlers, a critical discipline that ensured their reliability in public spaces. See, Axel told you these dogs aren't all they're cracked up to be. Doesn't even know a good thing when it's offered. Thor is working, Samuel explained, his patience wearing thin but his voice remaining controlled. He's trained not to accept food from anyone, but me, especially while in harness. Is that right? Derek's tone shifted to something more calculating. So he only listens to you. What if I just take him? There was sudden movement, and Samuel felt the harness jerk as Derek apparently reached for it. In an instant, Thor's demeanor transformed. Though he didn't bark or growl, the German Shepherd shifted position with lightning speed, placing his body fully between Samuel and Derek. Samuel could feel the tension in Thor's muscles through the harness, a clear warning to the provocateur without a single aggressive action. I wouldn't, Samuel said quietly. Thor was top of his class in both guide dog training and his previous career in law enforcement. He's trained to protect his handler. A moment of silence followed, suggesting that Thor's subtle but unmistakable defensive posture had made an impression on Derek. When he spoke again, there was a hint of uncertain respect in his voice. Called my bluff, did he? Maybe there's something to these police dogs after all. Thor assesses threats based on actions, not words, Samuel explained, sensing an opportunity to diffuse the situation through education rather than confrontation. He won't react to verbal provocation, but he's been trained to respond proportionally to physical threats. Proportionally, huh? Derek seemed intrigued despite himself. So what happens if I do this? Samuel heard movement, and tensed, unsure what Derek was doing. Thor remained steady, suggesting whatever action Derek had taken hadn't crossed the line into genuine threat territory. Not impressed, Derek continued. Let's try something else. Derek, one of his companions, said, the first time either had spoken. Maybe we should move on. Place is filling up, and we need to meet Razor by noon. In a minute, Vince, Derek dismissed. I'm doing an experiment here. The casual way Derek brushed off his friend's suggestion, combined with his persistent needling, told Samuel that Derek wasn't just passing time, he was deliberately testing boundaries, perhaps building toward something. The realization sent a chill through Samuel that had nothing to do with the mild spring morning. Your dog may have been something back in his day, Derek continued, but he's got to be 8-9 years old, getting a bit long in the tooth for a German Shepherd, isn't he? Probably slowing down. Samuel felt a surge of protective indignation on Thor's behalf. At 9, Thor was indeed entering the senior years for his breed, but the dog's training and natural intelligence more than compensated for any physical changes that came with age. If anything, Thor's years of experience had only enhanced his effectiveness both as a guide and as a deterrent to those who might take advantage of Samuel's blindness. Thor is perfectly capable, Samuel said simply. We'll see about that, Derek replied, and something in his tone made Samuel's skin crawl. Chapter 5, The Breaking Point. The next few moments unfolded with shocking speed. Samuel heard Derek stand abruptly, felt the table jolt as the man apparently bumped it deliberately on his way around. Then there was movement directly beside him, too close, and suddenly Samuel felt a hand clasp his shoulder with unnecessary force. What if I just helped you out of your chair? Derek said, his voice now directly above Samuel, fingers digging into Samuel's collarbone. A good citizen helping the handicapped. That's all I'm doing, right? In an instant, everything changed. Thor erupted from his sitting position with fluid, controlled power. There was no barking, no growling, just the swift, decisive movement of a highly trained animal responding to a direct threat to his handler. Samuel felt the pressure wave of air as Thor inserted himself between Samuel and Derek, forcing the man to release his grip and step back. The cafe patio erupted in startled exclamations. Samuel heard a chair topple, followed by the distinct sound of Derek stumbling backwards. What the hell? Derek shouted, genuine alarm replacing his previous swagger. Your dog just attacked me. Thor didn't attack you, Samuel corrected calmly, his hand finding the dog's harness once more. Thor had already returned to position, though Samuel could feel the heightened alertness vibrating through the animal's body. If he had attacked, you'd be on the ground right now. He merely created space between us, exactly as he's trained to do when someone touches his handler without permission. Control your animal, Derek demanded, but Samuel noted the new distance in his voice. He'd backed away considerably from their table. My animal is perfectly controlled, Samuel replied, which is more than I can say for your behavior this morning. A smattering of applause broke out from nearby tables, and Samuel realized they'd gathered quite an audience. He heard Elaine's quick footsteps approaching again. That's enough, she declared firmly. You three need to leave, now, before I call the police. The dog attacked me, Derek protested, though with noticeably less conviction. I could sue this whole place. We have 16 security cameras covering this patio, Elaine countered immediately. Every one of them just recorded you harassing a disabled patron and his service animal after being asked repeatedly to stop. So please, give me a reason to call the police. I'm sure they'd be very interested in reviewing the footage. A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of heavy boots shuffling on concrete and the low murmur of other cafe patrons discussing the confrontation. Whatever, Derek finally spat. Coffee tastes like crap anyway. Samuel tracked the sound of the three men moving away, their heavy footsteps receding toward the street. Only when the noise of motorcycle engines roared to life and then faded into the distance did the knot of tension in Samuel's shoulders begin to ease. Are you all right, Samuel? Elaine asked, genuine concern in her voice as she approached his table again. I'm fine, Samuel assured her, though his heart was still racing. His hand moved to Thor's head, fingers scratching gently behind the ears, a gesture of gratitude and reassurance. Thanks to Thor, and to you. Those security cameras I mentioned, Elaine admitted with a small laugh. We only have 4, and none of them work all that well. But he didn't need to know that. Samuel smiled despite the residual tension. Quick thinking. Your coffee's gone cold, Elaine observed. Let me bring you a fresh cup on the house, and something for Thor too. He's earned a treat today, I think. As Elaine headed back inside, Samuel took a moment to collect himself. The confrontation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit, not just because of the immediate unpleasantness, but because of the implied threat in Derek's words about Samuel's predictable routine. For 7 years the morning walk to Sunrise Cafe with Thor had been a cornerstone of Samuel's independence, a small but significant victory over the isolation that his blindness might otherwise have imposed. The idea that this simple pleasure might now be tinged with apprehension felt like a theft of something precious. But as Thor settled back into position beside his chair, solid and unwavering, Samuel reminded himself that he wasn't facing this, or anything else, alone. Good boy, he murmured to Thor, the simple phrase carrying the weight of profound gratitude. Very good boy. Chapter 6. Ripples of concern. News of the confrontation at Sunrise Cafe spread quickly through the close-knit Glendale neighborhood. By the time Samuel returned to his apartment 3 blocks away, his phone had already chimed with concerned messages from friends who had heard various versions of the story. Some accounts had Thor heroically tackling an armed assailant. Others claimed the dog had merely growled at some rude customers. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. Samuel's apartment was a carefully organized space that allowed him maximum independence despite his visual impairment. Every item had its place, surfaces were kept clear of obstacles, and technology specifically designed for the visually impaired helped with everything from cooking to managing communications. It was a sanctuary of order in a world that often felt chaotically unpredictable to someone without sight. After removing Thor's harness, the signal to the dog that he was officially off duty, Samuel settled into his favorite armchair while Thor took up his customary position on the area rug nearby, close enough to respond quickly if needed, but giving both of them their respective space. What do you make of all that, old friend? Samuel asked quietly. Thor's ears perked up at being addressed, and he gave a soft whine that Samuel had come to interpret as attentive concern. Samuel's phone rang, the distinctive ringtone identifying the caller as his daughter, Meredith, who lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. Dad, Meredith's voice carried immediate worry. Mrs. Abernethy from across the hall just texted me about some incident at the cafe with Thor. Are you okay? Samuel sighed, both touched and mildly exasperated by the efficiency of the neighborhood information network. Mrs. Abernethy, his 80-year-old neighbor with a penchant for monitoring the comings and goings of everyone in the building, had apparently appointed herself as Samuel's unofficial safety monitor after his wife's passing. I'm fine, Meredith, Samuel assured her. Just some troublemakers at the cafe this morning. Thor handled it perfectly. She said they were bikers. Dad, that sounds serious. It wasn't as dramatic as it probably sounds, Samuel said, though even as he spoke, Derek's parting words about routines being dangerous echoed uncomfortably in his mind. They were just being obnoxious, and Thor made sure they kept their distance. That's all. Maybe you should report it to the police, Meredith suggested, just to have it on record. Samuel considered this. Under normal circumstances he might have dismissed the incident as unpleasant, but ultimately not worth involving authorities. But there had been something specifically threatening in Derek's comments, something that suggested the encounter might not be entirely random. You might be right, he conceded. I'll give Officer Michaels a call. Kevin Michaels was a community liaison officer who had worked with the local service animal training program and knew Thor from his canine days. He'd been a helpful resource for Samuel over the years, occasionally checking in to make sure both man and dog were doing well in their partnership. And maybe, Meredith added hesitantly, maybe you should vary your routine a bit for a while, just to be safe.
The suggestion, though reasonable, struck at something fundamental for Samuel. His carefully established routines weren't just habits, they were carefully crafted tools that allowed him to maintain independence despite his disability. Disrupting them meant surrendering something valuable to the threat of what might be nothing more than an unpleasant but isolated encounter. "I'll think about it," he promised, not committing either way. After ending the call with Meredith, Samuel did indeed phone Officer Michaels, who listened attentively to the account of the morning's events. "The name Derek doesn't ring any immediate bells," Michaels admitted, "but Phantom Lord's MC is on our radar. They're relatively new to the area, trying to establish territory, mostly involved in low-level drug distribution so far, but with aspirations to bigger operations." "You think that's what this was about, drugs?" Samuel asked, puzzled. The confrontation had seemed personal somehow, not business-related. "Hard to say," Michaels replied. "Could be random intimidation, could be something more targeted. Either way, I'll file a report and alert patrol units to keep an extra eye on your block and the cafe for the next few weeks."
"I appreciate that," Samuel said. "How's Thor handling it all?" Michaels asked, his tone warming. "Still keeping you in line?" Samuel smiled, glancing toward where he knew Thor was resting. "Better than ever. He didn't even flinch this morning, just did exactly what he needed to do. No more, no less. That's why he was one of our best," Michaels said proudly. "Always had perfect judgment, that dog. Martinez still talks about him. You know, says none of his subsequent canine partners have ever measured up." After ending the call with Officer Michaels, Samuel sat quietly, weighing his options. The responsible course of action would be to adjust his routines temporarily, perhaps avoid the cafe for a few weeks, until any potential interest from Derek and his associates had faded. But there was also a principle at stake: the right to move freely through his neighborhood without intimidation, the independence he had worked so hard to reclaim after losing his sight. Surrendering that, even temporarily, felt like a significant defeat. Thor's sudden alertness interrupted Samuel's thoughts. The dog had raised his head, ears forward, focusing on something Samuel couldn't detect. A moment later, Samuel heard it too. Footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment, stopping directly at his door. Not the familiar tread of Mrs. Abernathy or any of his regular visitors, but heavier steps, deliberate and unfamiliar. Thor rose silently to his feet, moving to position himself between Samuel and the door, not panicked, but watchful, ready. The knock, when it came, was firm and official sounding. "Mr. Turner?" A female voice called. "Officer Rivera, Glendale Police Department. Officer Michaels asked me to stop by." Some of the tension eased from Samuel's shoulders, though Thor maintained his alert stance until Samuel gave him a gentle, easy command, their signal that the situation was under control. Opening the door, Samuel greeted the officer, explaining that he had just finished speaking with Michaels. "He thought it might be good to have an officer do a security assessment of your apartment," Rivera explained. "Given this morning's incident and the potential for follow-up intimidation, would that be all right with you?" Samuel hesitated only briefly before agreeing. As Officer Rivera moved methodically through his apartment, checking locks on windows and doors, and making recommendations for additional security measures, Samuel found himself viewing his sanctuary through new eyes, suddenly aware of vulnerabilities he had never before needed to consider. "Your building's external security is decent," Rivera concluded, "but I'd recommend adding a secondary lock to your door, something that can't be picked, and perhaps consider a small security camera for your entryway. There are models specifically designed for people with visual impairments, with audio descriptions of activity and remote monitoring options for trusted contacts like family members." "Is all that really necessary?" Samuel asked, troubled by the escalation from a single unpleasant encounter to security systems and reinforced locks. "Probably not," Rivera admitted frankly. "Most likely, those guys were just being jerks and will move on to harass someone else tomorrow. But in my experience, it's better to be prepared and not need it than the other way around." After Officer Rivera left, Samuel knelt beside Thor, running his hands through the dog's thick fur, finding comfort in the solid, steady presence that had been his constant companion through so many challenges. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured. "Are we overreacting, or not reacting enough?" Thor pressed his head against Samuel's chest in response, one of the many small gestures of connection they had developed over their years together. Outside, the afternoon sun slipped behind clouds, casting the apartment in shadows that Samuel couldn't see, but could sense in the subtle cooling of the air through the windows. Something had shifted today. A new uncertainty had entered his carefully structured world. But as Thor's warm weight leaned against him, Samuel was reminded that whatever challenges might come, he would not face them alone. Chapter 7. Nightfall. Samuel's evening routine typically included a shorter walk with Thor around the neighborhood park before dinner, followed by quiet hours at home with audiobooks or podcasts. Tonight, however, he decided to stay in, ordering delivery instead of cooking and spending time on the phone with various friends who had heard about the morning's incident. By the time he prepared for bed, the events at the cafe had begun to recede somewhat in his mind, contextualizing themselves as an unpleasant but hopefully isolated occurrence. Officer Michaels had called again to confirm that patrols would be increased in the area, and Mrs. Abernathy had delivered a homemade casserole along with assurances that she was keeping an eye out for suspicious characters, a declaration that had made Samuel smile despite his lingering concerns. Thor, however, seemed less willing to dismiss the day's events. Normally, the dog would settle on his bed in the corner of Samuel's bedroom after their evening routine, but tonight he positioned himself directly beside Samuel's bed, alert in a way that suggested he was standing watch rather than preparing to rest. "It's okay, buddy," Samuel assured him, reaching down to stroke the dog's head. "We're safe here." Thor whined softly in response, not disagreeing, exactly, but communicating something that Samuel couldn't quite interpret. After 7 years together, Samuel had become adept at reading Thor's various vocalizations and body language, but occasionally the dog still managed to convey nuances that escaped easy translation. Sleep came fitfully for Samuel, his dreams fragmented with vague anxieties. He woke several times, each time reassured by the sound of Thor's steady breathing nearby. The dog had remained beside the bed all night rather than moving to his own bed, an unusual deviation from their routine that spoke volumes about Thor's continued vigilance. It was during one such period of wakefulness, somewhere in the small hours of the morning, that Samuel became aware of Thor's sudden tension. The dog had gone completely still, head raised, listening intently. Then, slowly, Thor rose to his feet, moving silently to the bedroom doorway. "Thor," Samuel whispered, instantly alert. "What is it?" Thor made no sound, but his stillness spoke volumes. Samuel strained his ears, trying to detect whatever had alerted his companion. For several long moments, there was nothing, just the familiar ambient sounds of the apartment building at night, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of settling walls, the faint traffic sounds from the street below. Then he heard it, a soft scraping at his front door, metal against metal, deliberate and cautious. Not the sound of a key, but something else, something that raised the hairs on the back of Samuel's neck. Thor remained frozen in the doorway, his training preventing him from barking and potentially escalating whatever was happening, but his entire body communicating alert watchfulness. Samuel reached for his phone on the nightstand, his fingers finding the emergency call button that he had programmed after his vision loss. A single press that would connect him directly to 911. The scraping continued, followed by a muted click that Samuel recognized with horrifying clarity as the sound of his front door lock disengaging. Someone was entering his apartment. Samuel pressed the emergency button, then slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, finding Thor in the darkness by touch and placing a hand on the dog's back, both for guidance and reassurance. They moved together into the hallway, Samuel's years of navigating his home without sight now serving him well, as he silently positioned himself where he could hear the intruder's movements while staying out of immediate sight. The front door opened with excruciating slowness, the hinges making only the faintest whisper of sound. Footsteps followed, heavy boots trying to move quietly on the hardwood floor of the entryway, not entirely succeeding. Just one person, Samuel thought, straining to detect any indication of multiple intruders. Thor's muscles bunched beneath Samuel's hand, but the dog maintained perfect silence and stillness, awaiting instruction or clear threat before acting. Years of police training had taught Thor to assess and respond proportionally, He wouldn't react to mere presence, only to direct threat or specific command. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice suddenly blared from Samuel's phone speaker, shattering the tense silence. The reaction was immediate. The intruder's footsteps quickened, moving not away toward the exit as Samuel might have expected, but deeper into the apartment, directly toward the hallway where Samuel and Thor stood. Intruder in my home. Samuel spoke rapidly into the phone. 1421 Oakwood Avenue, Apartment 3B. I'm blind, with my service dog. Stay on the line, sir. Officers are being dispatched now, the dispatcher assured him. The footsteps had stopped at the sound of Samuel's voice, hesitating in what Samuel estimated was the living room area. Then, with deliberate heaviness, they began moving forward again, no longer attempting stealth. I know you're there, Samuel, a familiar voice called out, confirming Samuel's worst suspicions. Derek, thought you might want to continue our conversation from this morning. Thor's growl began then, low, deep, and unmistakably threatening. It was a sound Samuel had never heard from the normally controlled and silent dog, a rumbling warning that seemed to vibrate through the floor beneath their feet. Your dog doesn't scare me, Derek called, though his footsteps had stopped again, suggesting Thor's warning had indeed given him pause. Police response time to this neighborhood is 8 minutes minimum. We've got plenty of time to chat. Samuel's mind raced through options. The bedroom behind him offered little protection, no lock on the door, no way to secure it. The bathroom across the hall had a lock but would trap them completely if Derek decided to wait them out. The sensible choice was to maintain distance while waiting for police response, to avoid confrontation if possible. The police are on their way, Samuel called back, keeping his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth adding breaking and entering to your record. Derek's laugh carried no humor. Breaking and entering is the least of my concerns. You embarrassed me today, old man. You and your mutt. Nobody does that to me, especially not in front of my crew. The footsteps resumed, closer now, perhaps only 10 feet away at the entrance to the hallway. Thor's growl intensified, no longer just a warning but a promise. Sir, the dispatcher's voice came through the phone again. Officers are 3 minutes out. Can you get to a secure room? Before Samuel could respond, Derek spoke again, his voice carrying a new edge of determination. Here's what's going to happen, he announced. You're going to call off your dog, and you and I are going to have a little discussion about respect, or things are going to get very unpleasant very quickly. Samuel heard the distinctive click of what could only be a knife opening, the sound sending ice through his veins. The situation had escalated beyond intimidation to imminent physical threat, changing the calculation entirely. Thor, Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying an unmistakable command that both Thor and Derek would understand. Guard. The transformation was immediate. Thor's posture shifted, his growl silenced as he moved with precision from Samuel's side, positioning himself directly in the hallway between Samuel and the approaching threat. No longer just an alert service animal, Thor had reverted to his police training, a controlled but unmistakable wall of disciplined protection. Officers are 2 minutes out. The dispatcher's voice reported from the phone still clutched in Samuel's hand. Your dog doesn't scare me, Derek repeated, but Samuel could hear the new uncertainty in his voice. He should, Samuel replied calmly. Thor has taken down armed suspects twice your size. It's what he was trained for before he became my guide dog. You're bluffing, Derek challenged, but his footsteps had stopped advancing. Thor served 5 years with the K9 unit. Samuel continued, slowly moving backward toward his bedroom, while keeping his hand on the wall for orientation. He has 3 commendations for suspect apprehension. He can have you on the ground with a shattered wrist before you even swing that knife. The silence that followed suggested Derek was reconsidering his approach. Thor remained in position, not advancing, but not yielding ground either, a living barrier between threat and handler. This isn't over, Derek finally said, his tone shifting from confidence to frustrated anger. You think you're safe because of some dog. Dogs get old. Dogs get sick. Dogs can have
accidents. The implicit threat sent a fresh surge of fear through Samuel, but he kept his voice level. And people who threaten service animals get federal charges with mandatory minimum sentences. The officers will be here any moment. Your choice how they find you. A moment of tense silence followed, broken by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Derek cursed under his breath. This isn't finished, he spat. But Samuel could hear his footsteps retreating now, moving quickly back through the living room toward the front door. Thor remained in guard position until the sound of the front door opening and closing signaled Derek's departure. And even then the dog didn't stand down, maintaining his alert stance as if suspecting a trick. Units arriving on scene, the dispatcher reported through the phone. Stay on the line until officers make contact with you. Samuel leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how rapidly his heart was pounding, how shallow his breathing had become. The confrontation had lasted only minutes, but had felt endless, a terrifying glimpse into vulnerability he'd thought he had overcome years ago. Through careful adaptation to his blindness, Thor finally returned to Samuel's side, pressing against his leg with reassuring solidity. Samuel's fingers found their way to the dog's head, scratching gently behind his ears in silent gratitude. "Good boy," he whispered. "Very, very good boy." Chapter 8. Aftermath. The next hours passed in a blur of police interviews, crime scene technicians dusting for fingerprints, and concerned neighbors gathering in the hallway. Despite the late hour, Officer Michaels arrived shortly after the patrol units, his familiar voice a welcome anchor amid the chaos. "We'll find him," Michaels promised after hearing Samuel's account of both the cafe confrontation and the nighttime break-in. "Derek left plenty of evidence behind, and we have a good description of him and his associates from the cafe witnesses." "How did he even find where I live?" Samuel wondered aloud, the question having troubled him since recognizing Derek's voice in his apartment. "That's unfortunately not difficult," Michaels admitted. "Your address isn't published, but you've been going to that cafe every morning for years. Anyone watching could follow you home. And Phantom Lords have been expanding their information-gathering networks. They like to know the neighborhoods they're moving into." By dawn, the immediate police activity had quieted, though a patrol car remained stationed outside the building. Michaels had arranged for an emergency locksmith to replace Samuel's front door locks and add additional security measures, including a reinforced strike plate and deadbolt. "I'm also arranging for a temporary security detail," Michaels informed Samuel as the locksmith worked, "just until we locate Derek." Samuel sat at his kitchen table, a cooling cup of coffee between his hands, Thor resting vigilantly at his feet. The dog had remained in a heightened state of alertness throughout the night, never fully standing down despite the presence of police officers that he clearly recognized as non-threatening. "Thor hasn't relaxed since it happened," Samuel observed quietly. "It's like he's gone back to being a police dog instead of a guide dog." "In a way he has," Michaels agreed. "Canine training runs deep. It's why retired police dogs often struggle in civilian homes." Thor's unusual in how well he transitioned to service work, but the protective training is still there, just beneath the surface. "What happened tonight activated those older patterns. Will he go back to normal?" Samuel asked, a new worry forming. "I need him as a guide more than as a protector." "Give him time," Michaels advised. "Once he's certain the threat has passed, the guide dog training should reassert itself." Thor's always been exceptional at context switching. It's what made him so valuable on the force, and such a perfect match for you afterward. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door with breakfast she had prepared for Samuel and treats for Thor, her usual brisk efficiency amplified by righteous indignation over the night's events. "I heard the whole thing," she declared as she arranged plates on Samuel's table. "Would have called the police myself if I'd known what was happening. That man picked the wrong building to cause trouble in." Samuel smiled despite his exhaustion. "Thank you for the breakfast, Mrs. Abernathy, and for checking on us. That dog of yours," the elderly woman continued, her voice softening as she presumably looked at Thor. "Special doesn't begin to describe him. I always knew he was more than just a pair of eyes for you." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Samuel called Meredith to reassure her before she heard about the break-in from someone else. His daughter's initial reaction was exactly what he had expected: alarm, followed by immediate insistence that Samuel come stay with her family in Seattle until the situation was resolved. "Dad, this isn't just harassment anymore," Meredith argued. "This man broke into your home with a weapon. He threatened you and Thor. And now there's a police car outside my building and new locks on my door." Samuel countered gently. "I appreciate the offer, sweetheart, but running away isn't the answer. This is my home. At least let Jacob and me come stay with you for a while," she persisted, referring to her husband. "Just until they catch this guy." Samuel considered the offer. Having family nearby would certainly provide additional security and peace of mind, but there was also a principle at stake: the independence he had fought so hard to maintain after losing his sight. "Let's see how the next few days unfold," he suggested as a compromise. "If they don't locate Derek quickly, we can revisit the idea." After ending the call, Samuel showered and changed clothes, trying to restore some sense of normalcy despite the extraordinary circumstances. Thor shadowed his every movement, maintaining a closer proximity than usual, his attentiveness both comforting and a constant reminder of the lingering threat. Officer Michaels returned mid-morning with an update. "We've identified Derek Mercer, age 34, extensive criminal record including assault and intimidation, known associate of the Phantom Lords MC. We've put out an APB, and we're monitoring known hangouts. It's just a matter of time." "What happens when you find him?" Samuel asked. "Breaking and entering, criminal threatening, intimidation of a disabled person, threatened violence against a service animal. We're looking at multiple felony charges," Michaels explained. "With his prior record, he's facing serious time." "And in the meantime," Samuel pressed, "in the meantime, you maintain your routine as much as possible, but with added precautions," Michaels advised. "We'll keep the patrol car on your block for at least the next 48 hours. I've spoken with management at Sunrise Café, and they've agreed to have their security service keep an eye out as well." Thor whined softly from his position near Samuel's feet, as if contributing his own thoughts to the discussion. "And Thor?" Samuel asked, responding to the dog's vocalization. "He's still on high alert. I'm not sure he's going to be able to focus properly on guide work if he's constantly in protection mode." Michaels was quiet for a moment, and Samuel could imagine him studying Thor thoughtfully. "Thor's smart enough to multitask," Michaels finally said. "But you're right that divided attention isn't ideal for either role. Let me make a call. There's someone I think might be able to help with that specific issue." Chapter 9. Recalibration. The someone turned out to be Sergeant Maria Vasquez, Thor's former handler's supervisor from the K9 unit, who arrived at Samuel's apartment that afternoon. Thor's reaction to her presence was immediate, a whine of recognition followed by an eager approach that told Samuel this was someone the dog associated with positive experiences. "He remembers me," Vasquez observed with evident pleasure. "German shepherds never forget their people, especially not their training officers." "Can you help him switch back to guide dog mode?" Samuel asked, after explaining the situation. "He's been on guard duty since last night, won't fully relax, stays too close, keeps scanning for threats instead of focusing on guidance. It's a matter of recalibrating his understanding of the current threat level," Vasquez explained. Thor was trained to maintain protection mode until explicitly released from it, or until the threat is neutralized. In his mind, neither of those conditions has been met yet. Vasquez spent the next hour working with Thor, using specific commands and techniques from his police training days to first acknowledge his protective response and then gradually step him down from high alert. Samuel listened intently as Vasquez explained each step, fascinated by this glimpse into Thor's previous life and training. "The key is to honor his police training, rather than override it," Vasquez said as she guided them through exercises. "We're not telling him he was wrong to protect you, quite the opposite. We're acknowledging that he did exactly the right thing, and now we're updating his threat assessment." By the end of the session, Thor's demeanor had noticeably shifted, still alert, but no longer hyper-vigilant, the tension in his body easing into a more sustainable watchfulness. He'll still be more protective than usual for a while, Vasquez cautioned as she prepared to leave. That's appropriate given the circumstances, but he should be able to focus on his guide work now, without constantly scanning for threats. Thank you, Samuel said sincerely. I didn't realize how complex his training layers were. Thor was always special, Vasquez replied. Most dogs excel at either detection, protection, or apprehension. Thor mastered all three, and then successfully transitioned to service work. That's exceptionally rare. The depth of his training and his natural intelligence are what allow him to context switch so effectively. After Vasquez left, Samuel decided it was time to test Thor's recalibration with a short walk outside, just around the block, with the patrol car still visible for security. He fitted Thor with his harness, the familiar routine, settling both of them back into established patterns of cooperation. Outside, the spring afternoon was pleasant, the neighborhood seemingly unchanged, despite the profound shift in Samuel's sense of security within it. Thor guided him with his usual precision, though Samuel noted the dog's slightly increased alertness when they passed strangers, a small concession to the lingering awareness of potential threat. They had nearly completed their circuit of the block when Thor suddenly stopped, his body tensing in a way that Samuel immediately recognized as alert but not alarmed. Someone familiar was approaching. Mr. Turner, Elaine's voice confirmed Thor's assessment. I was just coming to check on you. Word about last night has spread through the whole neighborhood. Samuel smiled ruefully. News travels fast. Are you okay? Elaine asked with genuine concern. Both of you. We're managing, Samuel replied. The police have been very responsive. The cafe staff and our regulars have formed an unofficial watch group, Elaine informed him. If Derek or his friends show their faces anywhere in the neighborhood, we'll know immediately. The support was touching, a reminder that community could be as powerful a protection as locks and police patrols. As they continued their conversation, Samuel felt some of the tension of the past 24 hours beginning to ease, the simple act of normal human interaction helping to restore a sense of ordinary life. Later that evening, as Samuel prepared dinner with Thor resting nearby, his phone rang with a call from Officer Michaels. We've got him, Michaels announced without preamble. Derek Mercer was picked up trying to leave town on his motorcycle. He's in custody now, being processed on multiple charges. Relief washed through Samuel with such intensity that he had to sit down, the wooden spoon he'd been using to stir pasta sauce still clutched in his hand. That's good news, he managed after a moment.
There's more, Michaels continued. We found evidence in his possession suggesting the confrontation with you wasn't random. Derek was carrying a list of local business owners being targeted for protection rackets. The Phantom Lord's latest venture, Sunrise Café, was on that list, with your name specifically noted as a regular customers who might complicates their approach to Elaine. The revelation was startling. The idea that he had been singled out not for personal reasons, but as an obstacle in a larger criminal enterprise. In a strange way, it was almost reassuring. The threat had been real, but not specifically aimed at him or Thor as individuals. So what happens now? Samuel asked. Derek's looking at serious time, especially with his prior record, Michaels explained. And we've disrupted the Phantom Lord's expansion plans in your neighborhood. They'll likely move operations elsewhere rather than risk increased police scrutiny. After ending the call, Samuel sat quietly for a long moment, processing the swift resolution to what had briefly seemed like an open-ended threat. Thor approached, resting his head on Samuel's knee in a gesture that had become their private signal of connection over the years. Looks like we can stand down, old friend, Samuel murmured, scratching behind Thor's ears. Crisis averted. Thor huffed softly in response, a sound that Samuel had come to interpret as agreeable relief. But as Samuel resumed preparing dinner, he found himself reflecting on how quickly security could be disrupted, how suddenly the rhythms of ordinary life could be thrown into chaos. The experience had revealed vulnerabilities he hadn't fully acknowledged, but also strengths he hadn't fully appreciated, in himself, in Thor, and in the community around them. Chapter 10, New Normal. In the weeks that followed, life gradually resumed its familiar patterns, though with subtle but significant adjustments. Samuel continued his morning visits to Sunrise Café, but Thor's positioning at the table had shifted slightly. The dog now chose spots that afforded better visibility of the surrounding area, a small adaptation that Samuel recognized as Thor's ongoing commitment to vigilance without hypervigilance. The community's response had been unexpectedly warming. Regulars at the café made a point of stopping by Samuel's table to check in, and neighbors in his apartment building had established an informal buddy system for evening hours. Mrs. Abernathy had appointed herself head of this neighborhood watch, a role she embraced with characteristic enthusiasm. Mrs. Abernathy has organized the entire building into security shifts, Samuel reported with amused affection during his weekly phone call with Meredith. I'm pretty sure she has someone watching my door 24 hours a day. Good for her, Meredith approved. How are you really doing, Dad? And Thor? Samuel considered the question honestly. We're good. Different maybe, but good. Thor's found a balance between guide dog and protector that seems to work for both of us, and I've realized there's no shame in accepting help sometimes. This was perhaps the most significant shift, Samuel's willingness to acknowledge interdependence as different from dependence. For years after losing his sight, he had insisted on maximum self-sufficiency, viewing assistance as a potential slide back into the helplessness he had initially felt. But the incident with Derek had demonstrated that interdependence, with Thor, with neighbors, with the broader community, wasn't weakness but strength. Officer Michaels stopped by one sunny afternoon as Samuel and Thor were returning from their walk, bringing news that Derek had accepted a plea deal that would keep him incarcerated for at least 3 years. The Phantom Lords have moved their operations to the east side of the county, Michaels added. Your neighborhood is clear of their activity for the foreseeable future. That's good to hear, Samuel said. Thor will be pleased to return to full-time guide duties without the security detail. Michaels chuckled. I wouldn't be too sure about that. Some dogs find protection work highly satisfying. It taps into their deepest instincts. Thor may miss the extra responsibility. Samuel reflected on this as they continued chatting. It was true that Thor had seemed particularly fulfilled during the height of the crisis, his dual training finding perfect expression in the complex demands of the situation. Perhaps there was a lesson there about purpose and adaptation that applied to humans as well as dogs. Later that week, Samuel received a surprising call from Sergeant Vasquez with an interesting proposal. We're developing a community outreach program for the canine unit, she explained. Educational presentations about police dogs, service animals, and the intersection between the two. We could use someone with your and Thor's unique experience as part of the program. Completely voluntary, of course, but it might be a way for Thor to keep those protection skills sharp while still maintaining his primary role as your guide. The idea had immediate appeal, a way to give back to the community while honoring the full spectrum of Thor's capabilities. They arranged a meeting to discuss details, and by the end of the month, Samuel and Thor had become regular contributors to the program, visiting schools and community centers to demonstrate the remarkable abilities of service animals and former police dogs. Their first presentation at an elementary school revealed Thor's natural affinity for children, the dog maintaining perfect composure, despite the excitement of 25 third graders eager to meet a police hero dog. Samuel found unexpected satisfaction in sharing their story, particularly in helping young people understand both the challenges of visual impairment and the extraordinary partnership that had developed between man and dog. Thor is special because he has 2 important jobs, Samuel explained to the children. He helps me navigate the world I can't see, and he helps keep me safe when needed. But most importantly, he's my friend and companion. Does he still remember how to catch bad guys? One boy asked eagerly. Samuel smiled. He remembers everything he was ever taught. That's what makes him extraordinary. He can be many things at once, a guide, a protector, and a friend. As spring mellowed into summer, Samuel and Thor settled into what Meredith had taken to calling their new normal, a life fundamentally unchanged in its daily rhythms, but subtly transformed in its emotional texture. Samuel found himself more aware of the network of relationships that surrounded them, more appreciative of the interwoven dependencies that formed the fabric of community. On a particularly beautiful June morning, almost 3 months after the confrontation with Derek, Samuel and Thor took their usual place at Sunrise Café. Elaine brought their regular order, coffee for Samuel, a bowl of water for Thor, along with news of the neighborhood and friendly conversation. As Samuel savored his coffee, he reflected on how quickly life could change, how a single encounter had rippled outward, transforming not just his sense of security, but his understanding of connection and community. Thor sat beside him, alert but relaxed, embodying the balance they had both found between vigilance and peace. "You know what, Thor?" Samuel murmured, reaching down to stroke the dog's head. "I think we're going to be just fine." Thor leaned into the touch, his solid presence the most constant and reassuring element in Samuel's world. In the warm morning sunlight, surrounded by the familiar sounds and scents of the neighborhood they both called home, Samuel felt a profound gratitude, not despite the challenges they had faced, but because of them and the deeper appreciation they had fostered. Their story hadn't ended with Derek's arrest or the dissolution of the immediate threat. In many ways, it had only begun, a new chapter of a continuing journey, shaped by the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together, man and dog, guide and guided, protector and protected, each incomplete without the other, both made stronger by their unbreakable bond. Epilogue. 1 year later, Samuel stood at the podium of the community center auditorium, Thor sitting attentively beside him as they prepared to address the gathered audience, a mix of service dog handler, police canine handler, and community members interested in the intersection of these worlds. What had begun as occasional participation in Sergeant Vasquez's outreach program had evolved into something larger, a foundation dedicated to placing retired police dogs with visually impaired handlers. Inspired by the remarkable success of Samuel and Thor's partnership, the program had already matched 3 retired canines with new handlers, with promising early results. Many people ask me if I was scared that night when Derek broke into my apartment, Samuel began, addressing the question that inevitably arose whenever he shared their story. The truth is, yes, I was terrified, but not for the reason you might think. I wasn't afraid of what might happen to me. I was afraid of what Thor might be forced to do to protect me, and what the consequences might be for him. Thor shifted slightly at the mention of his name, his attention never wavering from Samuel. What I've learned through that experience, and everything that followed, is that fear is transformed when it's shared. Thor wasn't just protecting me that night. We were protecting each other, each in our own way. And that's the foundation of every successful partnership, whether between handler and service dog, officer and canine, or simply between friends. As Samuel continued his address, sharing the developments of the past year and the vision for the Foundation's future, he was aware of Thor's steady presence beside him, a constant reminder of resilience, adaptation, and the profound bond that could form between species, when each recognized the other's unique strengths and vulnerabilities. Later, as they made their way home through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, Thor guiding with his customary precision while maintaining his subtle environmental awareness, Samuel reflected on how much had changed since that morning at Sunrise Café, when Derek had first approached their table. What had begun as an act of intimidation had ultimately strengthened not just their partnership, but their entire community. The neighborhood watch Mrs. Abernethy had established continued to function, expanding into a broader community support network. Sunrise Café had become a hub for service dog education, with Elaine hosting monthly events featuring service animals of all types, and Thor, loyal, steadfast Thor, had found his perfect balance, guiding Samuel through the physical world, while remaining ever prepared to protect if needed, each role enriching rather than diminishing the other. As they reached their apartment building, pausing at the entrance as they did each day for Thor to survey their surroundings before proceeding inside, Samuel realized that what he had once seen as a compromise between Thor's dual identities as guide dog and former police canine had actually been an integration, not two separate roles, but a single, seamless whole, much like their partnership itself. "Ready to go in, buddy?" Samuel asked the question, a daily ritual between them. Thor pressed against his leg in affirmation, and together they moved forward, two beings navigating life's complexities as one, each making the other stronger, each finding in the other exactly what they needed to face whatever challenges might lie ahead. In the end, Samuel reflected, that was the true meaning of partnership, not dependence, or even interdependence, but something deeper and more profound. The recognition that sometimes our greatest strengths emerge precisely where our vulnerabilities meet another's capabilities, creating something stronger and more resilient than either could achieve alone. And in that knowledge, both man and dog found not just security but a lasting peace, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that whatever the future might hold, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together. The end.